The first lesson we covered, and the second lesson, we're triune just like the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. We're body, soul, and spirit, 1 Thessalonians 5:23. And that's imperative that we always remember that, because we cannot understand the dialogue on the afterlife unless if we understand this preeminent dialogue that we're made in His likeness and image. That's how God made us. And our body is temporary. The soul is eternal, and the spirit, I don't know why, this is what happens when you type up when you're recovering from COVID. Actually, that's like the old English, that is, if the spirit of life is what brings our soul to life. So in other words, the soul of man never dies, because associated with it is the spirit of life that God breathed into Adam, and he became a living soul. Genesis 2 verse 7, 7 verse 22. It's the soul of man that goes on to live permanently, because it always has the spirit of life in it. And the soul is the real you. That's who the you is. Okay, what you saw in the mirror before you got to church today, that's not you. That's all going to rot away. Don't worry about it. Some of us, it's already doing that. Okay, our body is a testament to the second law of thermodynamics. All things are in the process of decay, disintegration, and destruction. All right, so when we die, our soul becomes disembodied, and the place of disembodied souls in the Greek culture is called Hades. In the Hebrew culture, it's Sheol. It's the same thing. It's a place you go to before you get to the final place. It's like when you're at the waiting room at the doctor. Okay? Nobody goes right in. You notice you don't have a door that goes right into the doctor. You have to wait. You're paying to wait for the actual appointment. Sort of like the military, isn't it? Hurry up and wait. Or going through Burger King at the drive-in. You wait longer than you do eating the food anymore. Everybody's waiting. Well, this will be a good wait or a bad wait, because there's two sides to the Hades realm. There is Tartarus, which is the condemned side. And then there's Paradiso, paradise, which is the saved side. So there's actually two waiting rooms. Can one switch sides in Hades once entered? Can one switch sides? And though we've already entered the discussion of Hades, which is the first stop to eternity, there is a major understanding we must understand. The permanency of the Hadean realm on future implications. So, Jesus revealed, let me see where's, okay, for centuries before Christ, there were practices of purification for the dead. The hope is that you could switch sides. You can switch sides. Where they're getting this from. Now, notice I got a picture of the Grand Canyon. Now, if you said you were going out for a 3-mile walk after supper, and you came to that, you could technically cross it, but you're going a mile down, a little bit over, and a mile up. You just added some time to your trip. But I want you to imagine for a second, there's nothing in between these two. You can't jump across it. That's what impassable means. Now, with that in mind, Jesus said on the topic, now, we claim to be disciples of Christ, followers of Christ. So if Christ says something about something we're talking about, and we're saying a different something, that makes what we're saying a nothing. Okay? Luke 16:26, the master of the universe, the creator of mankind, he said this, and besides all this, between us and you, there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. Jesus said there's a great chasm, a separation, a great gulf affixed, as the King James says. It's impassable. You can't cross it. So when you see it, whatever it is, you say, I ain't getting over there. The Grand Canyon looks more inviting than that place. And it's pretty much nothingness. It's a lifeless void of great expanse, separated the saved from the lost. And now, wouldn't it be neat, location, location, location. Okay? If you could somehow redefine what that chasm is. Do a chasm hijacking. Rename it. Throw some conditions on it. It's amazing what you can do. To say this was the only doctrine circulating on the topic, because today there are movements, multiple movements, that have been going on. There's no new thing under the sun. Centuries before Christ came to his earthly ministry, men had tried to hijack that and make it a new product. Don't call something new and improved if God's already perfected it. All you can do is mess it up. For example, prior to Christ, chasm hijacking is nothing new. Chinese Buddhists made offerings for the dead, being in search for a better outcome. They have hijacked it, hoping that you could sway somebody from the good, from the bad to the good side. Let's just throw them into the middle category. God hasn't made his mind up yet. That's what that hijacking is about. Oh, we could put it in limbo. And they got that from the Greeks. Plato and other Greek writers recorded from nearly 400 years prior to Jesus the mentioning oftentimes of celestial Hades. Celestial Hades. Teaching laid claim to the great chasm of the dead being trapped, awaiting purification, hoping to be able to go to Paradiso instead of Tartarus. Boy, they were bad. But right now they're in limbo. This in turn began to seep into Jewish teachings and practices, and by the time of the 2nd century BC, the Jews were offering prayers for the dead. Prayers for the dead attempting to change the outcome of the deceased. That was not what the Old Testament taught, but they did it anyway. See, there's always a group of people who want to do chasm hijacking. There's a major religious cult in our country where they teach terrestrial, telestial, and celestial heaven. And that you can go and baptize for the dead. You can do things that will change their outcome. It's all about the same thing, chasm hijacking. Beware of the chasm hijacker. Later it crept into Christianity on a major front with man-made teachings like purgatory, limbo, perdition, purging. All those are words that are used for, that's right, chasm hijacking. And they teach that everybody goes into that middle section. It's just like neutral. And then if you can light enough candles, say enough repetitive incantations, pay enough money, that you can absolve those sins, purify, purge. And they get that saying from the purging of metal. When you smelt metal, when you're purifying metal, you put it all in together and you just heat that thing up big time. And you know what happens to the impurities? They just kind of evaporate. They boil over, they get off it, and then you end up with purification. And that's why they call it purging oftentimes. And so they say if you do those things, you can have a soul purged of enough sins that God would be swayed. This purification process would allow passage for the lost soul to go from the inevitable Tartarus to Paradiso. Later on, they extended it to prepaid sin, which is called indulgences. But what's the biblical foundation for their argument? Because I can describe one thing over here, but if you don't see the same pattern in another religion, chasm hijacking is a big sign there's something stinking about the doctrine. Here's their claims. Now, you know how in the church we're supposed to say, if we hear something, and we say, well, where in the Bible did you get that? We want to go back to the Bible, don't we? See, everybody wants the sticker of the Bible. We want to get that sticker on us, on our heart, that says, what I believe is biblical. And so we go in, instead of proof texting, they want to go ahead and try proof texting. We just want to know what the context says. Proof texting, as I've said before, it's like you take a bow and arrow and you shoot an arrow right into that wall. And then you go over to the arrow and you draw the target around it. You're going to hit a bullseye every time. And that sticker don't count. If you get confidence from that sticker, you might as well just get a participation trophy. It means nothing. And so the people who teach these type of doctrines, they like to do it as well. If I could just have a few verses, see, it's biblical. Don't think about it, though. It's biblical. Well, I heard them say Bible verses. That don't make it biblical. Louis Farrakhan quotes the Bible more than most Christians. He's far from that. Isaiah 4:4. Here's one they like. When the Lord has washed away all the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the bloodshed of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. And so they say, ooh, there's the arrow. Let me go get this Isaiah 4:4 paint and I'll paint it around. It'll look like a bullseye. See, it's even worse than proof texting because they just project. It's like the people who put the Christmas lights up and they spend hours doing it, and then the guy next to him gets that thing you plug in and it just twirls, and you know that ain't real lights, don't you? You don't think they actually put little lights that turn on their house and everything? It's not even a real target they're painting over the top of it. Notice the word purge. That's the word they drive in because that's the word they use, the purging. It's a place of purging. They latch onto that like a pit bull onto a steak. And then they start talking about, look, there it is right there, purging. Well, first of all, that isn't what it's talking about. Those teaching this will often cite the verse and redefine the Hadean realm. Context for the verse is actually talking about the natural consequences of life. That God's going to turn you over to the natural consequences. You lost your country. Your people got half killed. You went through a purging here on earth so that you would be rethinking things. And that's what God's talking about. It's not talking about the chasm, the in-between. But they went ahead and ascribed it to that and hoped you didn't notice. But just in case, if that one didn't fool you, here's another one. By the way, this is ancient mosaic of perdition, the place of the smelting of human souls. 1 Peter 1:7. So that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, gold, metallurgy term, even though tested by fire, there it is, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ. They often cite this to prop up their teaching, drawing attention to tested by fire. They said, there's that metallurgy term right there. See, that's talking about purification of souls. But this is completely out of the context. First of all, not only does it not talk about the chasm there, if you read the verse right before that, 1 verse 6, it says, in this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, this is on earth that's happening. If necessary, you have been distressed by various trials. They're saying the trials you're going through are going to make you a stronger Christian. And now what James said, the trying of your faith worketh patience. but let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, lacking in nothing. Jesus purifies us on this earth. If you have entered a covenant with Jesus Christ, you're cleansed right then. And then he helps you unpack your luggage. Now to him who is able to keep you from falling, to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. There is a purging that occurs here on earth, and it is our trials. And that's what Peter's talking about. So, then they go to this one. Now, I wish I could give you a lot of verses, but these are the best ones. They got one in Maccabees, which is even worse than these, but because we don't use the intertestament history books, it really is not a fact. Jesus didn't recognize it. Why should we? 1 Corinthians 3, 12 and 13. Now, if any man builds upon the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each man's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it will be revealed with fire. The fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. Right there, they're saying, there it is. That's chasm. That's purgatory. That's perdition. That's limbo. So, they attempt to gravitate towards purging terminology. This passage is a natural attraction for that teaching. Their argument says that following death, the deceased will pass through a purging process, leading to the ability to be transferred into paradise. This doesn't align with the text either. See, every single one of these, the arrow, they already stuck it in. They picked their target. All these religions do this. They know there's a great gulf affixed. In the afterlife, there's the good and the bad. There's always a separation. They're not intermingled. No matter what religion you're talking about, there's always a separation. But if we could hijack that great gulf affixed, that's separating the chasm, it's amazing what you can do to the world. In verse 11, it says, no man can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Paul's talking about the gospel. Paul's saying to them, listen, you're trying to base it on what you do. And it's not based on what you do. The foundation is Jesus Christ. Unless if you have that death, burial, and resurrection at the core of your being. Unless if you enter that covenant with Jesus Christ. Then all these other things, you're going to find out they don't amount to a hill of beans. They're going to be gone. That's the only afterlife connection. But it's talking about things that are happening right there. Ephesians 2, verse 8 and 9. Paul would later say, for it is by grace you are saved, through faith, not that of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. And that's what Paul's teaching here. They're trying to build up big things for their own life. Look at us. We're the fancy church. Look at me. I can speak in more tongues than y'all. That's what he was talking about. Look at me. I was baptized by Paul. I was baptized by Apollos. I was baptized by Peter. Some were saying, I was baptized in Jesus. And what Paul was saying is, listen, the foundation is Jesus. All these other things are stupid things that are going to fade away. You might think it's hay, straw, rubble. You might think it's gold or silver or stone. You might think it's big things down here on earth. But in the afterlife, that's what's going to matter. What was your foundation? And that's what Paul was saying. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh unto the Father except through me. The bottom line is we either trust Jesus or we don't trust him. But that leaves us with the question, why would you just read about the chasm? You know the chasm's there. Everybody knows the chasm's there. Why hijack it? Well, for two reasons. This is why the doctrine of purgatory, perdition, limbo, praying for the dead, Buddhist rituals, all these. This is why it comes forward. Number one, unhealthy grief support. People are grieving. Somebody they loved has died. It already hurts. It truly, truly hurts. Now, Couple that with, let's say it was your cousin Joey, and Joey worked in the mafia all his life, and Joey talked like this, and Joey intimidated people, and Joey lived like a heathen, and he wore a pinky ring. I mean, Joey wore fancy suits. And Joey always would say, oh, I'm not going to go anywhere about Jesus. I'm running the show down here. They call me the boss. Well, now when that guy dies, he's dead, just like Rover's dead all over. Dead is dead. And that's a great equalizer. But when someone you love is dead, and when someone you love like Joey is dead, and you know what the scriptures say, now you got to process it a different way, don't you? The second reason is what I just mentioned, monetary funding. This is Leo X. He was one of the popes. He lived from 1475 to 1521. He was a member of the financial household of the high-living Italian family by the name de Medicis. Famously said, this is a famous quote of his, since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it. And that he did. He commissioned many of his family members to become the bishops, and they lived like millionaires. They had a ravishing lifestyle. And when they ran out of the funds of the Catholic Church, they propagated a fundraising scheme to sell sins, prepaid sin program called indulgences. They're the ones who got this thing going. You know, we could get you, in limbo. And then people, oh yeah, I love my relative, take this money, do this. And they started doing their incantations and lighting all those candles and look at God, look at that. Okay, it's okay, you can go over there. Because the leaders of the church would say, yeah, that was good what you did. And then they'd switch them over. And all those religious organizations, whether it be Buddhist, whatever it is, that's the same thing. So, follow the money. Always follow the money. And they only extended it because they wanted to cash in on the prepaid sin. They said, well, actually, I have a revelation from God that you can actually, if you're so rotten, you can prepay your sin. So when you die, it's already prepaid. That's how they built the Vatican, by the way. Yeah, that's how they paid for it. It was a massive scheme. This is the second reason that this took off big time. Since purgatory was man-made doctrine, it could be exploited by men. But that which is Christ cannot be exploited by man, because it exploits the man. But yet Hollywood, to this day, I could go on and on and on. All these movies about somebody dies and there's not heaven or hell. It's like something in between that all feeds into it. It all stems from this, that fantasy that we could chasm hijack. Like Beetlejuice, remember when they died? Gina Davis and what's his name? Michael Keaton. They ended up in the house until the final destination. Okay? Remember Ghost? That's right, Demi Moore. Well, Patrick Swayze, he dies. He didn't go to heaven or hell. He was working it out down here. That was a form of perdition. Gabriel, this is one. There's actually a movie called Perdition. Groundhog Day even had subtle references to this. Where am I? I'm not in the normal life, and I'm certainly not in heaven. What's going on here? He was learning through the trials in the intermediary, but then he was able to go back. Your cartoons, people talking, people's things that are, there's embedded theology that we can have, and it just seeps in and attaches to our mental interpretation of life. There is no switching sides, period. Once you leave this earth, there's nothing in between. There's nothing in between that lets you still have options. Your choices are done. at that point. Think about these. Switching sides. Let's look at some of these verses here. Luke 16:26. Besides this is a great chasm affixed, Jesus said. Ain't no crossing over. Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto man once to die, then comes judgment. Judgment's final. And John, let's look at Jude 1 verse 6. The angels which kept not their own estate, he has left in everlasting chains under the judgment of the great day. Even the angels that have been judged, they are in Tartarus, according to the account in 2 Peter. 2 Peter 2:9, the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment. Those things are set. It is set. There's no switching sides. If anybody in any religious organization, any Hollywood movie, your buddy, anybody indicates that you leave from here and go somewhere where there's still freedom. No, you've made a surrender of that freedom in this life. And that's why we go to this closing thought. Jesus said in John 3:18. We know John 3:16. God so loved the world. If you watched a Dodgers game in the 70s, you know that verse. Because that guy who always sat behind the dugout always had it. Lifetime tickets. We know John 3:16. But let Jesus finish talking. He who believes in him is not judged. That's the negative connotation. He who does not believe has been judged when? Already. Because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Now think about this. We get to choose where we go, whether we go to heaven or not. God already chose his part. He already said, I want you in heaven. But he ain't going to force you against your will. On the day of judgment, I promise you, nobody's going to be holding a gun to anybody's head and say, some angel holding and say, no, you get to heaven, young man, right now. No, I don't want to go to heaven. I want to go to hell. No, they're going to take you right. No, that ain't going to happen. Sheep and goats. Not saying anything is goats. Don't say, preacher said something bad about me. Don't do that, okay? Okay? We get to choose whether we're a sheep or a goat. And these goats are not the greatest of all time. They'll be the greatest failures of all time if we don't choose properly.